Hello, my name is Whitney, and this is my first video ever on YouTube, and it's also the first time I'm ever speaking publicly about a cause, a person, somebody who is so important to me, dear to me, somebody who I love very much, and that person is my beautiful son, Dimitri, who would be 14. And sadly, Dimitri isn't here because he was killed during his birth, during his labour, during the intrapartum care I wasn't taken care of. And I have posted a GoFundMe, which I will put the link to in at the bottom. You will find it. I've posted a GoFundMe, you know, just sort of laying out the details of why and what I am asking for. But I will tell you here. So basically, my son, I went full time with him. I was just 21 years old. I didn't know anything about having children, being a mum. I was just learning like the rest of us have to when we're first pregnant with our first child. And I went to all my appointments and everything was good. My son was £6.14 when he was born. The biggest baby I've ever carried, because I do now have 2 more children, thankfully. But on the night that my waters broke, I was with 2 friends in my house, in my home, and we went to the hospital. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention the hospital at this point, so I won't. But we went to the hospital, which I lived pretty close to. And there was one lady there in the triage, in the midwife's triage, and she said to me, after just, you know, examining me with her fingers, she said, I'm only 2 centimeters dilated and that I needed to go home and get in the bath and take paracetamol. Now, I never took any drugs, any sort of paracetamol, ibuprofen, anything when I was pregnant. So it was it was a big thing for me, and I didn't want to do that. So I got in the bath, as she said, but I declined the paracetamol at home. And then it would have been 5 hours later, I went back to the hospital with a different friend who had done sort of like a handover. And if she sees this, you know, if she sees it, I know she will remember, because it was something that was just so hard to forget, even 14 years later, that she, when we came back to the hospital the second time, the same midwife was found sleeping in the bed, at her desk, with 2 dirty beds behind her or next to her in the same room. And, you know, I came in a wheelchair at that point. I'd been throwing up. I was in so much pain. I was having contractions. I felt like I needed to go to the toilet. That's what it felt like for me. I didn't realize that I was pushing. And she told me, I told you to take paracetamol. You know, you're not ready. You're not in labor. But I was a bit more insistent, and eventually she put me on the monitor. And again, just remember, I've said that because anybody who's had multiple children now, or even had just one child, in a normal hospital that has competent staff, they should put you on the monitor the first time that you come. And that didn't happen for me. I didn't know that I was supposed to have that. So at that point, when I became a bit more insistent, she then went out, and I told my friend I'm going to go to sleep because I don't want her kicking me out. I'm really tired and I need to be in the hospital, and I feel like something could be wrong. She came back and she bought me the monitor, and she put it on my stomach, and we listened to my baby's heartbeat for 1 minute, just 1 minute only. And that is recorded in the notes as well. And he didn't sound the same as he had sounded all of those 9 months previously. And I asked her why, and she said it was because of the way he was sitting. And she had an answer for everything, you know. Every time I said something, you're not in labour, the baby's not coming, the baby's not coming. And eventually when she took me off, you know, I said, do you have children? Because, you know, I'm in pain. She said, yeah, I've got 3. And I know what I'm talking about. So I didn't want to have a baby in the midst of me arguing, in the midst of me shouting. Who wants to do that? We want to be heard. We want to be listened to, but we also, in that moment, I didn't want to be a nuisance. I didn't want to disbelieve what she was telling me because I trusted her like you're supposed to. So I went home, and it was about 3:30 in the morning at this point. And I went home, I got straight in the bath, and I was out of the bath, and then I was back in the bath, and then I was in the bed, and I was just in pain all night long. I was still being sick. Even though I told her all of my symptoms, she didn't seem bothered. She said that it was normal. So I waited until I felt like it was time, because that's what she said, the baby's not coming until tomorrow. And no one told me what time tomorrow. They just told me, she told me I'm not ready. So when we did finally go back to the hospital, which would have been about 8:15 in the morning, I couldn't stand up. I couldn't sit down. I was in so much pain, and I had to get in a car. Thankfully, my friend was driving me. And when I got back into the hospital, I just ran. Well, I made it straight to the toilet, because that's where I needed to be at that point. And they took, you know, they knocked the doors down, the staff, and I was carried out of there. And I was brought into the labour room straight away, where I was then in front of about, I'd say 9 staff. It was 9 staff members. And you know that in a delivery room, you know, from the films that I've watched before, you're not in that situation unless something's happened. Something's wrong. And at this point now, there was alarms going off. There was people shouting at each other. They were then shouting at me, you need to get this baby out. You need to do it now. You need to push. You need to push. And I didn't know what was wrong. And I said, you know, I am, but, you know, I was weak at that point. I was completely weak. I'd been in labour for just coming up to 13 hours from when my waters had first broken, when I'd first attended the hospital. And I shouldn't say but she and the doctors, they got me on the bed, and I was made to get into all different types of positions to give birth, but there was no pain relief. There was no gas and air. There were women, I do remember, there were women in there that were quite sympathetic and trying to hold my hand, but at this point I was just frantic, because, you know, you're in labour, and I was in so much pain, and I still wasn't getting any pain relief. And they were just telling me to push. And it went on for about 15 minutes from when I got to the hospital. And if any doctors are watching, or anybody who has any sort of medical experience, I was put into the McRoberts position, and this is after the doctors had already attempted a ventouse delivery. So that's the cap that they put on your head, the baby's head, and they try to suction the baby out. But they failed at doing that, and so they then went on to do the McRoberts procedure, and then my son was born. And then my friend was let into the room, because at this point she wasn't there, because we'd forgotten my notes, because we were up all night. We were going back and forth to the hospital and nobody was listening. So the 3rd time we went, we'd forgotten the notes. And so when I went to the hospital and they'd taken me in the room, they sent her home straight away. Go and get her paperwork, and then you can come back. And then she came straight back, and I kid you not, as soon as my baby was born, they gave me gas and air. And I'd never taken gas and air. I know that's nitrous oxide now. I know that's what a lot of people do with balloons and stuff like that. I had never taken anything like that. I don't even think that stuff was really around, like a legal high, when it was legal. I don't even think it was around at that time when I was 21. I'm 35 now. So they gave me gas and air. My friend came into the room eventually, and she was crying, and I was crying. I was so relieved though, because I was like, oh, I've done it, you know, I finally done it. It was hours and hours, but he's here. And then they started to stitch me up, and then eventually, when the gas wore off of me, I looked at this, it was like a cart. It looked like a bit of a cart in the corner, the far corner of the left room, and it had all these numbers on it. And I said, oh, what are all those numbers for? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to adjust my lighting. But I did say, what are all those numbers for? And they said that's how long the machine's been on. And I said, well, that says 14 minutes. And I haven't heard my baby crying. And everybody sort of just looked at each other in that moment. And the doctor that was sitting between my legs, stitching me up, he slapped my left leg like this. I'm sorry, your baby didn't make it. Like that. And I, you know, I've always been a bit feisty, I suppose. And I just couldn't believe what I was being told. And I said, what do you mean? You know, and you've slapped my leg. I didn't just lose a purse. That's my child, you know. But I was obviously still a bit, it just wasn't real. Even though he'd said it to me, I was angry that he said it. But it didn't sink in. It wasn't real to me in my mind. And I looked at my friend who was over me, and she was crying harder at this point now. She was crying. And then I said, you know, because there was multiple staff members in the room, and one of those nurses was actually a friend of mine's mother. And that was the friend that had originally taken me to the hospital the first time. I knew her mum not that well, but me and Adore were good friends at the time. And she said, didn't she put you on the monitor? This was as everybody was leaving the room. And I started thinking, and I said, well, yeah, she did, but she only did it once, and it was only for 1 minute. And when I did hear, he didn't sound okay. Straight away, they were just like, you know, no one was really listening to me at that point. They took my baby, and when they came back, they bought a nappy on him. And I was so angry about that, because that was something you've taken away from me again, because, you know, he's not here. He doesn't need a nappy. Let me do it. Let me dress him. Let me be his mother. And they stole that from me. And I don't want to make this video, you know, that's what happened. I don't want to make it too long. There's so much more detail, which I can and I will upload in due time, depending on how much traction this gets, depending on, you know, how this goes. Because where we are at now, 14 years later, or 13 years later, I've got 2 children now, 2 beautiful children. And my daughter is 10, and she was 9 last year, but she's very, very articulate. She's always known that she had an elder brother, and she, you know, we visit him at the cemetery every year. I have 2 children, like I said. My youngest one's 8. It's been very hard. You know, it's been such a catch-22, because I don't want to not go and visit my son. But then sometimes I have to take my children. And then I think, well, why would I not take them? Because that's their brother. And I've always struggled with that. And so, yeah, they know they have a brother. And just one evening last summer in August, we had a really good day, me and the kids. And we'd been out, we'd had a really good day. And after putting them to bed, my daughter just keeps coming out of bed, and she was just talking about Dimitri, my son, or her brother, and she kept saying, Mum, what would Dimitri look like now? And Mum, do you think we look like him? And I was answering the questions as much as I could, as best as I could. You know, I was even being asked, I was even being asked if, you know, if he was here, would he be in the front seat? You know, I could tell my daughter missed him. Just like I did. Just like I still do. And I then said to my daughter, I don't want to talk about this. It's really late. Well, what, you know, why have you woken up to talk about him? And then she went on to ask me a few more questions, and then she said, well, I just can't understand. Was he ill? And I said, no, Eden. Sorry. I said, no. If I'd have got the treatment that I needed, then he would still be here. And she looked at me dead in the face, square on, and said, well, Mummy, what did you do about it? I can't believe that. Like, wow, what did you do about that, Mum? And I burst into tears. That's what I did at the time, because nobody in 13 years had ever done that. Nobody in 13 years ever challenged me to actually do something about it. And I did in the beginning when he first died. You know, my mother we lost her, God rest her soul. But at the time, she was like, this is neglect, and I know it is. And if you'd have handled this situation better, my grandson would be here, and I tried. But I was getting nowhere. I was getting nowhere in the beginning. I was being told he died of natural causes. He had a placental abruption. The cord was around his neck. It's not our fault. It's natural. It's natural. And, you know, even though I knew how many times I'd come to the hospital, even though I knew that I'd listened to my baby's heartbeat and it wasn't the same, and just because they were telling me over and over again it wasn't their fault, I felt like there was nothing I could do. It was just such a battle. As someone who was 21, my mother then went into this deep, dark depression. You know, I had to plan my son's funeral practically alone. I wouldn't say completely alone, because the same friend who was there for my son's birth, she helped me. You know, she talked me through some things. She helped us do a 9-night. But everybody else was just like, nobody was actually saying to me, what are we going to do about this, Whitney? You know, we have to fight. We have to get justice. I hadn't even been to a funeral before. I didn't know anything about death. This was the first death that I was experiencing, and it was my first child. So it was very, very, you know, obviously it was very traumatic, but it was also very confusing, very, very, it was just so blurry to me. I don't know. I don't even know how I got through that time. But, so I can't remember where I went to. I'm trying not to jump back and forth, so please bear with me. So when my daughter said, what did I do about it? I burst into tears in front of her, and I said, I tried. It was so hard for me back then, and I didn't have the strength to carry on and fight. You know, I didn't tell my daughter that I had attempted suicide multiple times, but that is what happened. That's all documented by the police when they found me at various places. And, you know, in the same year after my son's birth. And she hugged me. My daughter is so wonderful. You know, she's the most perfect rainbow baby, as well as my little boy. Like, they're both everything to me. But at that moment, she hugged me and she said, Mum, I didn't want to make you upset, but I'm just angry. That's my brother. And it's almost, you know, it's almost like something clicked in that moment. And one thing I did say is, what I meant to say is, when she was born in 2014, so this was like 3.5 years after Dimitri was born, I did attempt to go and fight again because I felt stronger. I was a mum again, and I was, you know, I felt almost complete. But I was being told, you're 1 year out of date. You can't do this. Your statute of the limitation is out. So you can't do this, and I can't take your case, and you know, it's just too much. I couldn't do it. And I went to a few solicitors. And so that's where I became, you know, almost resigned to the fact that I wouldn't get justice because I was too late. And it's not fair the way that the NHS do that. They give you 3 years to get justice, because to me it wasn't about claiming, you know, I didn't know anything about the courts process. I didn't know anything about how much this would take out of me. All I wanted was to hear them say, we did this. Yes, it was our fault. Yes, we do accept liability, but they just didn't. So again, fast forward to last August. I went to bed and I was in tears that night after I had that conversation with my daughter, when I put her back to bed. And then I woke back up and I was still low. You know, it was like a cloud. I just couldn't get it out of my head what my daughter had said. Like, what did you do? And I remember I went out in the garden, I sat down with a cup of coffee, and I got on the phone and I called that hospital. And I reopened, you know, I re-begun this pursuit for justice. And straight away on the phone, they seemed like, you know, I don't even know what the word is. It was like, I don't want to say scared, but yeah, we'll use that word, scared. They said, I spoke to somebody from CQC of that hospital that day, and she said, can I take a message? You know, well, they're not available right now. Can I take a message? And I said, well, this will be a very long one, because I am a mother that's lost her child in your hospital. And this happened 13 years ago. But I know that, you know, we have cause to reopen this, because it's not only now affected me, it's affected my children. I have not recovered. I have not recovered. That's what I said in so many words. And she said, and that was about 10 o'clock that morning. And she said, okay, I'm going to get somebody to call you back. And somebody did call me back that day. And I wish that I could say his name, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to do in this situation, so I won't. But he said to me, what do you want us to do about this now? It was 13 years ago. And I said to him, well, it seems like it was yesterday for me. You know, to you, it's just a job. You don't remember his birthday. You don't remember this or that. He was a living human being. A beautiful child. And he would have been making such a big difference, a beautiful difference in this world had he been here. And I want justice. It's time that you took accountability for what you've done. And then he told me to go through PALS, and then I did all of that, and I've gone through that, and we're now in May. So I will just speed up the timeline again, because it was in October of that year, last year, that I finally sent my letter of claim to the hospital. I did it all myself. I didn't have a solicitor at that time. I do now, and I will get to that soon, because he's been amazing and he has believed in me. And that's also because, sadly, his wife went almost through the same thing, or pretty much through the same thing, without me going into details. But that is the case. And at that time, I didn't have a solicitor. I was met with, emails by the NHS resolutions, and they were all going through what was going to happen, and that it would take 4 months for me to get a response, which was so hard because it was October, and I said, how am I going to get through these next few months just sitting there waiting to hear an answer? Like, yes, we understand what this has done to you. We understand that this was caused by us. That's all I wanted to hear. That is all that I wanted. And I waited and waited and waited, and it got to February. And February came, and they didn't give me any answers. They just asked for an extension. And I mean, they were asking me for extensions from December. I gave an extension from December to the end of January. And then when it got to the middle of January, then they said, oh, can we do it February the 28th? This is at the same time where I'm supposed to be hearing from the NHS resolutions. And at this time, I didn't have a solicitor. Nothing had gone to court, but I had so many solicitors almost, trying to shut me down, giving me all of these pushbacks. And when it got to the second one in January, I said no. I said, no, I do not agree upon an extension, especially as, there was so much paperwork missing, vital paperwork of that night. There's nothing in my paperwork to say. I mean, I wish I could show you, and I probably will in a different video. I will have a video with all of the proof that I've got to back up what I'm saying. But for somebody who came to the hospital 2 times on 2 separate occasions in the same night, why is there just a little paragraph like that? And it's written in retrospect by this midwife of when I came to the hospital, and she's mixing up all the times that I came. I came at 8:45. She says I came at 10:15. We both agreed that I came back at 3 a.m. in the morning. However, she just keeps saying, and she's actually saying I was 1 centimeter dilated, not 2 centimeters. And then she says that she did everything. But it also then says on the medical records that when I gave birth, there was no more membranes inside me. And that means all of my waters had gone. All of my waters had gone at home. When this woman's telling me, get in the bath. How are you going to know? How is anybody going to know how much water that they're losing in labour if they are stuck in a bath all night? You wouldn't know, especially if there's no medical attention being given to you and this is your first baby. Let's just go back. It was my first baby. So, due to those reasons, and for them not giving me the paperwork that they have been holding back for so long, I declined any, I didn't want to give them, this is my key. I didn't want to give them, hello baby, didn't want to give them an extension. And so when I said, I gave my reasons and I said, this is why I don't agree with the extension, I just didn't hear from them. They just didn't give me, even when the deadline ran out, they just didn't get back to me. They ignored me. And so I went to the High Court. I went to the High Court in February and I filed my claim, and I gave them proof of all the letters that I'd given and all the correspondence that we'd done, that we'd had, and the court accepted it. I was there without a solicitor. I was there alone, literally. Just me. And the court accepted my claim form and told me, gave me hope. That's what he gave me. He really did. And then when that happened, the hospital's defendant, the hospital solicitor, then came back and they said they contested all of what I'm saying. It didn't happen. And then, since then, it's just been back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I've produced all of the paperwork that they need to give to me. I've written to the data protection officer at the hospital. I get ignored. I've written to NHS Resolutions. She cannot help me anymore because I went to court. That's what they say. Once you go to court, we cannot ignore it, and I'm out of the picture. And a part of me wonders, maybe I shouldn't have gone to court, but I don't. Another part of me just thinks, I know I did the right thing, because they cannot hide. They cannot hide from this now. It's out there. It's public knowledge, and it needs to be shared. It needs to be told about what they did to me. So, in April of this year, after I attempted to write my particulars of claim, which actually just was like a witness statement, I wasn't writing it in the CP format, you know, the CP rules format. I wasn't putting any of that stuff in that the lawyers and solicitors do, all of that jargon. I don't know anything about that. All I know is what happened to me. All I know is that it was wrong. And they then applied for a stay, which is a suspension of my case, which the judge upheld on the grounds that I needed to write my particulars of claim, and not only that, I needed to get medical expert reports which pinpoint the abuse or the neglect that took place in that hospital. Because it has also transpired in my son's post-mortem that he had not only spinal hemorrhaging upon being checked at the hospital in his post-mortem, he was also bleeding on the brain, and that was caused by the Ventouse cap because the doctors were too rough with me. The spinal hemorrhaging, I'm assuming it's when they got him out. They were rough. They were so rough with me that they did all of that to my baby. And they also said that when my son died, he had lack of oxygen. Sorry, my key keeps coming back. He had a lack of oxygen, and they call it petechi or petechi. I don't know how it's pronounced, but that I can get the spelling up. But petechi, he also had hemorrhaging, subdural and intradural hemorrhaging. You know, he had so many things that were wrong with him. And as a newborn baby that hasn't even come into this world, I hadn't even held him at that time, but yet he suffered all of those things. Whose fault is that, people? Who? Because I know it's not mine. I know it's not mine. I didn't even know about all of the hemorrhages until I actually got the post-mortem. I didn't know about the hemorrhages until the post-mortem. And, you know, even the person at the hospital, I won't say her name because she was amazing. The person who gave me the post-mortem said, this is a shit show, and I really hope you get it sorted. She said, I've only been here 2 years and I don't know anything about it, but I am so sorry for what happened to your baby, and I really hope that this gets sorted. And that was before I'd even read the post-mortem. So I was thinking, why would she say that? And then to see all of that, you know, it put me in a dark place. And it really did for about a week. It was almost like I'd lost him again, because you read about, you know, all the injuries and all the things that you possibly could have done to save him. Because I do think to myself, if I had just shouted at the woman, if I'd have just said, no, I'm not leaving, if I'd have just said, I want to see somebody else, you know, but I didn't, I trusted her. It's ruined my confidence in most people, because I always go back to that fact. I trusted a national health professional, and she did the complete opposite of what she was then paid to do. She was paid after killing my child. She's still working as a midwife, even though, you know, she killed my baby. And there's no, I mean, I don't know if there's remorse, because I've never spoken to her again, but, you know, I just can't understand how somebody with children could do that to another mother. But at the moment, that's neither here nor there. So let me continue, please, with this video, because I can see it is... I want you all to stay with me. So once they applied for the stay, which was granted, I panicked and I went to a solicitor. I found one, and he was actually the first one on the list that I'd been given. So I was just going to call them all, you know, one by one and see. But the first person I called, and he said, I said to him, are you able to do no win, no fee? And he said, yeah. And he asked me to come in. And straight away, you know, he heard me, he listened to me, he could see that I needed help. And he asked me, how did you get this into the High Court? And you know what I told him? I told him it was God. It was God. I don't know if any of you are religious, but I sure wasn't. When I lost my son, I didn't think that there was a God. I kept thinking, if there was, then why would this happen to me? I kept thinking, you know, these things aren't fair. And, you know, I was angry. I was angry with the world. And the friends that I had at the time, they were amazing. They took me to church, and eventually things, you know, I wouldn't say they got better, but they started looking up. And eventually then I became a mum to my beautiful children that I have now. But I know I wasn't strong enough at that time, and I feel like God knows that I wasn't strong enough. And even if I had gone through all of that stuff, I still might have been on that downward spiral, but I'm not anymore. I'm just not. I'm a warrior. Now I am ready to fight. So we did all of this, and, you know, with the solicitor, we signed all these forms. And then eventually I put him in, well, we got in touch with a medical expert, which was a medical legal midwife, somebody who will do reports based on what's happened to my child and how I should have been taken care of, where the negligence fits in with the injuries that my child has. We know for a fact that she's going to say the things that I've been saying all of this time, because you cannot get away from the fact that a baby died. And not only did he die, he had catastrophic injuries caused to him during labour. And all I did was get in the bath. So I don't see how water can cause a spinal hemorrhage or a brain hemorrhage or anything like that. It's water. So we got the midwife's report set up. My solicitor, who again was amazing, he managed to bring the fee a little bit down. But the only problem is now that, you know, I'm so stuck, because we are on, what date is it? It was the 8th of June today. We have to be in court to lift this stay by the 27th of June. But we also have to have the medical professional's report with us. Now, the medical professional, she wants to be paid her fee within 30 days of us receiving the report. And if we don't pay within that time, then my lovely solicitor, he gets fined, he gets fined and sanctioned, and all the bills go to him, and it goes up and it goes up. And I don't want to do that to somebody, not especially when he had also fronted £1,000 of his own money just to get us a barrister. Because I don't know how this stuff works, but I am so grateful that, you know, God has given me the people, the right kind of people at this moment in time to just be there and to steer me through. Because, you know, if I'd have been doing this on my own, and I was prepared to go to court and to testify and to cross-examine if I had to, I was prepared to do that alone. But if a barrister will make it easier, and he has paid that money, I mean, God bless him. I wish him nothing but happiness and peace and just amazing things because of what he's done to help me. So I then set up a GoFundMe just yesterday, And I put my story there in not so much depth, but this is why I've made the video, just to give you a better understanding, although it does say a lot on the GoFundMe. And I am appealing to everybody that is watching this to please help us get justice, me and my children, to get justice for Dimitri, their brother and my first child. So the fact that we got this far already, it is just, it's a miracle. I can only say it's God alone. And I know, you know, I know that people might not agree with that. People might just say, oh, it was just circumstances. But the way that this has transpired, 13 years, we're now on the 14th year, because my son would have been 14 on March the 3rd. So we're now in the 14th year, and the courts are giving us a chance. But I cannot risk walking into that court and not having the right things behind me. I have asked for £1,600, and even if you cannot give me any money, which I understand because times are hard, if you could share my post or share this video far and wide and let people see what is actually happening, and the effects that it does to real people, because we're not just people on the news, people, you know, who have solicitors and they don't have a face. This is me. This is real pain. This is real anguish. This is real grief that doesn't leave you without justice. It just doesn't. It doesn't get better. They say time is a healer, and I just don't feel like that has worked for me. If anything, it's made me so hardened. It's made me so cautious. It's made me so, like, I'm so protective, as I'm sure most of us are anyway, but I'm so protective over my kids, because all I think is I lost one, and that was in a professional setting. So I can't trust you, because you're not even a professional. What might you do? You know, that's how I think in my mind. And I know I've got PTSD. I know I've got all of these things. I just haven't been diagnosed with it, because I've kept so far under the radar, because I can't trust anybody. It's horrible. Well, you know, with the money that I'm asking for, it is to pay for this report. My solicitor has also mentioned that we should get a psychiatric report done, expert report, and we should also get an expert obstetrician report. I found the obstetrician who seems to be amazing. His name is Ellis Downs, and he's from Harley Street, but also works back and forth in different in another hospital, I believe, but he also does medical legal work. I've spoken to him. Well, I've spoken to his secretary, Nicole, who was lovely. But I can't even go as far as booking him, because we haven't even got the midwife's report. And at the moment, the midwife is who I was always talking about. I need that report, and then we can move on. You know, if God graces me with amazing people that are willing to donate more for us to do that, then that would be wonderful. But if not, I understand. I'm going in, and I'm going in with the report of the midwife. I want to thank you so much for listening to my story, because it hasn't been easy for me to tell it, and I don't know what it's like watching it, but this is my story. And if anybody knows any barristers that are willing to work, you know, no win, no fee. If anybody knows an obstetrician that is willing to help me, that is willing to get the payment at the end of this case, just please send me all the details that you have, because I really need help. Because this is going to affect not only my life, but my children's, my surviving children's, because they want justice too. We need this chapter closed. It's been going on all of their lives, and all of my adult life, the whole of my adult life. And I just thank you if you've got this far. I will leave the link for my GoFundMe in the comments, and I'll see you on my next video. Thank you so much. Bye bye.